You stand up from a chair, and before you have taken a full step, your circulation is already adjusting. Gravity has changed the problem. While you were sitting, blood was distributed under one set of conditions. The moment you rise, several hundred milliliters of blood can shift toward the lower body and abdominal vessels. That does not automatically mean something has gone wrong. It means your body has work to do. The American Heart Association describes this shift as part of the normal challenge created by standing. Less blood briefly returns toward the center of the circulation, and your body has to compensate quickly enough to keep blood pressure and blood flow from falling too far. So the number on a blood pressure cuff is not being measured against a completely still system. You moved, gravity shifted some of the blood downward, and your circulation responded. That response is the real story. Most people think of blood pressure as a number they either have or do not have, 120, 130, 140. But blood pressure is constantly being regulated. Position, movement, rest, stress, temperature, meals, and other conditions can change what the cardiovascular system is being asked to do. Standing is one of the fastest examples. Inside the walls of major arteries are pressure-sensitive sensors. When the change in position briefly reduces pressure reaching those areas, signals travel through the nervous system. Blood vessels can tighten, and heart rate can adjust. The purpose is to keep circulation stable enough while your body changes position. That is why a reading taken after you stand can look different from one taken while you were resting. The difference does not automatically mean the machine is wrong, and it does not automatically mean you have a blood pressure disorder. It may be catching part of a response that is still unfolding. If you want everyday cardiovascular changes explained in context instead of turned immediately into alarms, subscribe to The Quiet Heart. Here, the goal is to understand what a number can tell you and what it cannot. Now notice how quickly all of this happens. Gravity does not wait several minutes after you stand. The redistribution begins immediately, and for most people, compensation begins immediately too. That is why the first few moments after standing can look and feel different from what is happening a minute or two later. You may have experienced this without ever thinking about blood pressure. You get out of bed and feel slightly unsteady for a moment. Then it passes. Or you rise from a chair after sitting for a long time and need a second before walking normally. Those experiences can have many explanations, and a brief sensation alone does not diagnose anything. But they show why position and timing cannot be separated. A blood pressure value taken while seated after several quiet minutes answers one question. A value taken soon after standing answers a different one. The cardiovascular system has been given a new task, and the number may reflect how that task is being handled at that moment. Age adds another layer, but not in the simple way people sometimes assume. Turning 60 does not suddenly make blood pressure unstable. There is no biological switch that flips on a birthday. But with increasing age, the systems involved in rapid blood pressure regulation can become less consistent in some people. Medical conditions, fitness, hydration, medications, and nervous system function can also influence the response. So two people of the same age can stand up and show very different patterns. Even the same person can have different readings after lying quietly, after eating, after physical activity, during an illness, or when hydration and medications differ from usual. Position is only one part of the context. A common mistake begins when someone checks a seated blood pressure, stands up, sees a different number, and immediately asks, "Which one is my real blood pressure?" Both readings may be real. They were simply taken while the cardiovascular system was solving two different problems. The more useful question is what happened between them. How quickly did the response occur? Did the pressure stabilize? Was there a meaningful sustained change? Were there symptoms? And were the measurements taken in a way that allows them to be compared? Those questions lead to a detail that changes the interpretation of standing blood pressure. Clinicians do not only care whether the number moved, they also care about when it moved. And the difference between the first moments, the first minute, and the next few minutes makes this story much more precise. That timing matters because a standing blood pressure response is not judged from one random moment. Clinical protocols compare what happens before standing with what happens after the body has been upright long enough for the response to unfold. In the CDC's orthostatic blood pressure procedure, a resting measurement is taken after several minutes lying down. Blood pressure and pulse are then checked again after 1 minute and after 3 minutes standing. This is a clinical assessment procedure, not a home test for diagnosing yourself. What it demonstrates is that time is part of the measurement. A reading taken seconds after you stand is not answering exactly the same question as one taken several minutes later. In the first moments, gravity has already shifted blood downward, and the cardiovascular system is responding. By the first minute, the response has had more time to develop. Over the next few minutes, a sustained pattern becomes more informative. This is where the medical term orthostatic hypotension enters the story. The classic definition involves a sustained drop in systolic blood pressure of at least 20 millimeters of mercury, or a drop in diastolic pressure of at least 10 within 3 minutes of standing. Those numbers give clinicians a common definition. They do not identify the underlying cause, and they should not become a pass or fail game with a home blood pressure cuff. The definition tells us something narrower. The change has to be large enough and sustained under a defined measurement process to fit the pattern clinicians call orthostatic hypotension. That helps explain why a brief dip and a sustained fall are not automatically the same thing. Symptoms add another layer. Someone may feel lightheaded, weak, unstable, or close to fainting when standing. But the sensation alone still does not reveal the cause, and a blood pressure change without obvious symptoms may also matter in some clinical situations. The reading and the experience provide different pieces of context. Medications, dehydration, illness, prolonged inactivity, nervous system conditions, and cardiovascular conditions can all influence this picture. A pressure drop by itself cannot tell you which factor is responsible, and it is not a reason to stop, reduce, or reschedule medication without professional guidance. Now comes the part that surprises many people. Standing does not always make blood pressure go down. In some people, systolic pressure rises substantially when they stand. Researchers and professional societies recognize this as a real orthostatic response, too. A consensus definition describes an exaggerated pressure response as a sustained increase in systolic blood pressure of at least 20 points when moving to standing. When that rise occurs and standing systolic pressure reaches at least 140, the pattern is described as orthostatic hypertension. A single high reading after standing does not establish that diagnosis. What matters for our investigation is that regulation can move in more than one direction. At first, the logic seems simple. Gravity pulls blood downward, so pressure should fall. But the body does not simply surrender to gravity. It reacts. Sometimes compensation is not strong enough. Sometimes the response is more pronounced. Sometimes the reading changes only briefly. Sometimes the pattern persists. So the useful question becomes more precise. What kind of response occurred? How long did it last? And under what conditions was it measured? Which detail changed your interpretation most? Gravity, timing, or the fact that standing pressure can move in either direction? Tell me which one in the comments. You do not need to share blood pressure numbers or personal medical information. There is one more measurement distinction that matters. Routine home blood pressure monitoring usually tries to make conditions as consistent as possible. The CDC recommends resting quietly before the measurement, sitting with the back supported, keeping both feet flat on the floor, supporting the arm, and avoiding conversation. The purpose is to reduce unnecessary variation so readings taken over time are easier to compare. An orthostatic assessment asks a different question. It deliberately introduces a change in position, because the response to that change is what is being observed. One method tries to reduce variation. The other studies a particular source of variation. So a seated number and a standing number should not be treated as interchangeable measurements taken under identical conditions. Once that is clear, the final question becomes much more useful. If one standing number cannot explain the whole response, what information is actually worth noticing? Usually, it is the pattern around the event. Was the change repeatable? Did it happen once? Or has it happened several times? Was there lightheadedness, fainting, unusual weakness, or a fall? Did it happen getting out of bed, after sitting for a long time, during an illness, or after some other change in health? Those details do not diagnose the cause. They make the situation easier to describe accurately, and that can be far more useful in a conversation with a healthcare professional than arriving with a conclusion already attached to the number. Instead of saying, "My medication is making my pressure drop," The useful information may be that the problem has happened repeatedly after standing when it began, whether symptoms came with it, and whether anything else recently changed. Medication can certainly be part of the clinical picture, but changing a dose, stopping a medication, or moving it to a different time based on one home observation can create a new problem instead of solving the original one. Individual medication decisions belong with a qualified healthcare professional who can look at the full pattern. There is a practical reason all of this matters so much later in life. Standing up is not a special medical event. You do it getting out of bed. You do it after breakfast. You do it from the couch. You do it in a restaurant, in a waiting room, after getting out of a car, and before walking across your own home. If that transition begins to feel unreliable, the concern is no longer only a blood pressure number. It can affect confidence in movement. Someone may begin rising more cautiously, reaching for furniture, pausing before walking, or worrying about falling. That is where a small cardiovascular clue begins to touch independence. A brief change in pressure with posture can be part of the body adapting to a new position. But recurrent lightheadedness, fainting, falls, or a repeated concerning pattern deserves a conversation with a qualified healthcare professional. And some situations need faster attention. Fainting or severe symptoms accompanied by chest pain, severe shortness of breath, new weakness on one side, difficulty speaking, or another sign of a possible medical emergency should not simply be watched at home. In the United States, call 911 for a suspected emergency. That is not meant to turn every moment of dizziness into something frightening. The purpose is to separate ordinary uncertainty from situations where waiting is not the right choice. If you want future episodes to separate what a health number shows from what it can actually prove, subscribe to The Quiet Heart. Now return to the simple moment where this started. You were sitting. Then you stood. Before, a different number might have looked like a contradiction. Which reading is correct? Why did it change? Should it have changed at all? But standing gave your circulation a different job. So, one number did not simply replace another. You caught the cardiovascular system responding to a change in position. Once timing, symptoms, measurement method, and repetition enter the picture, the reading becomes more useful because you stop asking it to explain more than it can. The real clue is not that blood pressure moved. It is how the response unfolds when gravity suddenly asks your circulation to adapt.